Hola, compañeros. It's your old pal, King Waspinator. Welcome back to Total Party Skills. Hit like and subscribe. I've been on the record in regards to the upcoming Rings of Power that I don't have much in the way of faith in Amazon to be able to produce a quality Lord of the Rings product, in large part because the entire conception of the project is vainglorious and cynically done, and it's not born from any genuine story idea that someone had and wanted to bring to life. It was entirely a command from on high. We will have our own Game of Thrones. Buy this property and make me a Game of Thrones. And so we're going to see how that goes. However, my trepidations about this show have little to nothing at all to do with any of the casting, of which I am neutral on up until the point where I actually see any of this show, which I'm still somewhat debating on whether or not I'm even going to bother watching it. However, of course, a lot of the stuff in the media, from both the, anti corporate entertainment critics of YouTube to the people who star in the damn show itself, have been making issues out of the presence of Africanized hobbits and black dwarf queens and dark-skinned sylvan wood elves, which is all dumb. It's just dumb to argue about. But okay, here we go. The guy playing the new sylvan wood elf character put out some sort of statement. He'd already talked before about how since he was a young boy he had wanted to play an elf but didn't know if he could because he saw no elves of color. And he's made some sort of grandiose quote that I'm paraphrasing it a little bit because it's not right in front of me, but it's along the lines of let it now be said no more that there are no elves of color, or something along those lines. That might have been a double negative. Basically, he's just saying that because of him, you'll never be able to say that there aren't black elves out there in the world. Which, that technically that's inaccurate. There are no elves of color. There's also no white elves because elves are fictional, made-up, imaginary creatures from myth, and they're not real, so they don't really have any color now, do they? Also, just on a technical standpoint, there have been other bits of media in the past, including that first, crappy Jeremy Irons Dungeons and Dragons movies that have had quote unquote elves of color. There's kind of a paradox going on here with the fandom and the people making these things, antagonizing the fandom and antagonizing each other. That's kind of creating more of a storm than there should be. I would like to think. I've long maintained that there's ways to go about promoting diversity in your entertainment that doesn't alienate the audience, even if at first they might be a little like, what? And part of that way of not alienating people is to not make a big deal out of it and just kind of like let the product stand and give people a chance to make up their own damn minds. Not try to browbeat them into feeling like they have to comply or they're going to be viewed as being bad people in society or anything if they don't like your product. That's I don't think that's good business practice in and of itself, and it's more likely to have the opposite effect than the one intended. Unfortunately, that train has long since sailed, and the idea that Hollywood can just up and stop, making a big deal out of their casting decisions and just quietly, put out their products and just let people, simmer on it a little bit and get used to the idea that this character might be transsexual or this character might be a woman or yada, yada, yada. I'm not sure if they're going to be able to switch to that after all these years of self-congratulatory back-patting that they've been doing, and it's created a problem See, for a little while there's especially like right after the Last Jedi had come out, I'd made a point of like actively wanting to understand the perspective of people who didn't like this movie, and in the years since, the whole little cottage industry has emerged on YouTube of basically anti Disney, anti mainstream entertainment YouTubers who make a living off of every day making their little video about how Kathleen Kennedy's out to get you and all that kind of stuff. And early on, I made a point of like really like listening to the critiques, and yeah, there's valid points to be rationalized out of why this scene in this movie's bad or breaks canon and all that kind of stuff. And I certainly agree with the merit argument that the best possible person for the role should be cast in the role if available, and so on and so forth. However, statistically speaking, you'd think just at least every once in a while, a product that features a prominent black lead or a prominent female lead, or what have you, would pass the bar of merit, so to say, with this crowd. But it's just odd coincidence, I guess, that every single time someone who doesn't fit the standard classic mold gets cast in something in a prominent role, there's bitching about it. There was validity to be said, a certain kind of logic behind the idea of like, well, we just don't want people race swapping and gender swapping these classic characters that had been portrayed as white in the past. In the same way that you wouldn't think it'd be cool to be making a movie about Shaka Zulu and have Tilda Swinton play Shaka Zulu. Yeah, there's a logic to that, obviously. However, packaged with that was always the statement of like, just make new original characters if you want to cast these people in these movies and TV shows. Okay, fine, except recently, as by example, we have like the Obi-Wan Kenobi show, and a lot of people got into a tizzy over the presence of Reva, and of course, there's the usual Twitter shit-tards saying stuff like, oh, you're just a diversity hire and you suck. And the people reviewing Obi-Wan Kenobi, because they've spent 5 years building up an entire brand and audience around fuck Disney, Disney's terrible, they're not going to go into that show wanting it to be good. They actively have to find things wrong with it. And so if they can make a big deal out of, oh, the woke diversity casting, they will, and they did. However, in that particular instance, that's a case of the studio kind of doing what they had said they had wanted earlier, where with the whole like, yeah, if you want to put these people in our shows, then you should just make new characters for them. Well, they did. They made an original character, and y'all still complained. And there were, maybe obviously not everyone, but there was an awful lot of weird, like racial kind of overtones to the complaints, which like stand out even more when like the other complaints are just kind of half-hearted because you're just looking for something to complain about. Oh, this show's terrible because the little girl playing Leia couldn't run very well, and it broke my verisimilitude, and all that kind of shit. However, if there's a segment of the audience that is now reacting like this to even original characters of color being put into properties, that's not necessarily their fault or originates from some sort of a nefarious motive on their part. They've been trained to react this way by the studios who've spent the last 5, 6, 7 years making a big deal about their inclusive new casting policies and going out and giving themselves awards. The Academy Award for most diverse and inclusive casting director this year goes to yada yada, and using it as a shield at times, to deflect from criticism and to diminish the critics to just being the worst possible interpretation of what they're saying. And after years and years of doing that, Now, when people see the big studios, especially from certain specific studios, put out a product and it includes person of category X, people are now just going to assume that that person is there for the policies that have been put in place and not because they just gave a badass audition and got the role that way. So like I said, I don't know how you can get that genie back in the bottle. It's been dwelled on too long, and even if we were to make a conscious effort to switch over to the merit model, but still actually being wide open in terms of who you're going to allow to audition to display whether or not they have the merit for the role, is still going to just be assumed to be diversity casting for the next several years by the people who are already prone to getting uptight about that. And the Rings of Power, as we are seeing, is starting to suffer from the exact same thing. They didn't, as far as I can tell, they haven't gender or race swapped any established characters that they're pulling from the Lord of the Rings appendix to put in this show. The Black Dwarf Queen, I believe, is original. The Black Sylvan Elf, I believe, is original. The Black Harfoot, I believe, is an original character. And so, on that basis of qualification, they're kind of doing what the audience has been saying they'd rather see them do. Instead of giving us a female Gandalf or a black Galadriel, just give us some original characters if you want to bring in different kinds of people. And yet, for some weird reason, there's still just this weirdly coincidental backlash about it all. Because apparently, quietly, Lord of the Rings was always somewhat just thought of as being like the Western white man's fantasy world, in the same way that Wakanda is for African Americans and such. In fact, I remember when Black Panther first came out, and people were complaining about that. The unrealisticness of the setting and that kind of stuff. I was just kind of like a shrug. It's like, it's black people would like their own Lord of the Rings, so let them have, who cares? Like, it's not going to hurt you that someone else has a movie that they can go watch, even if you're not into it. If you're not into it, don't go see it. Entertainment should theoretically have infinite options to choose from. There should be no limitation to the amount of and the type of entertainment that you want to shove into your eyeballs. Just beyond the fact that we all have limited lives and a little limited amount of span of time within our lifespans to waste on just absorbing storytelling and entertainment and movies and all that kind of stuff. But and yes, there's some validity to the idea that in specific to the movie studios that they only have X amount of budget and they're only going to greenlight so much stuff a year. But you shouldn't let that get in the way of the idea that you can have multiple options and they don't necessarily have to negate each other. Diversity at its core is supposed to be additive, not subtractive, or not something that automatically cancels something that already existed out. Just because you make a movie that features a prominent black lead doesn't mean that you then have to go back into the catalog and take away a movie that had featured a white lead. That's not what's going on. It's just another additional option is how it should be treated. But apparently our fantasy world of elves and dwarves and hobbits is supposed to be a photorealistic match for northwest Europe circa 1200 AD for time and all perpetuity, despite the fact that these companies are owned and making these shows for audiences in countries that in modern times do have a bit more of a diverse population with multiple backgrounds. But no, it's always got to be photorealistic. And yeah, it's on one level, it's extremely silly that people are either pro or con getting up in arms over the idea of elves of color. But it wouldn't be an issue if Hollywood hadn't been acting like this the whole time and working more and more people into this mindset where they see any little indication of it and they're just going to assume that that's what's going on and they're not going to give things a chance. The effort to make people less racist through media inclusion is undermined by the attitudes of the people who've been doing this. Just be polite to your audience. Don't over explain your decision making if you're doing something that they find questionable. Don't tell them they're bad people for finding it questionable. Just be confident and don't put your foot in your mouth. And don't give yourself awards over it and be like, oh, look how good we are. Oh my God, we're such good people. Exploiting actors so that we can make tons of money was already a great humanitarian gift that we were giving to the world, who's these poor morons who are just so starved for entertainment. But now, on top of it, we're helping them become better people by making them look at black actors prance around wearing elf ears. It's multi-layered. I don't think that even the people at the top who are promoting this stuff, it's not really being done out of some sort of motive of them not being racist and them wanting to correct racism. There's a lot of money shit that's tied in with this and stuff. And so it's a big mess that's unnecessary. But and I'll say, I don't see a solution or an easy way out of it. I guess there's not a really good natural conclusion to this video, but just going back to the original point and the original quote that made me want to do this, of the whole, let it no longer be said that there are no black elves. That will continue to be said because elves aren't fucking real, and they can be any imaginary color you want. Dungeons and Dragons, like, their elves aren't all like Caucasian. I mean, hell, just by taking them off the human color skin spectrum entirely, when it comes to fantasy stuff, it's like, yeah, elves are green or blue or variant shades of that instead of all being either really dark brown or really light brown, as all humans fall on a spectrum of. That's also part of the whole problem with the phraseology of people of color, is actually old white supremacist framing of saying that you have all of humanity and then white people as a separate little thing, and that is purified of this dirty color. I don't know why we've decided as a society to re-embrace that kind of thinking, especially since we, like to make a big deal about how we think white supremacy is bad, but I'm not the one who's been making these decisions. I'm just trying to comment on them and just point out that there's contradictions to say and somehow all these people are operating. But humans are humans, and it really shouldn't matter in terms of like just classic theatrical theory who plays who. The audience should be smart enough to understand that when they're watching a television show or a movie or a streaming show or whatever, that they're not actually looking at reality, and therefore it doesn't need to be photorealistic. The audience is participating in a way with the program they're watching by deciding that they're going to buy in to what they're watching on this little tiny screen in front of them. But, it's clearly not real life. You can tell that it's not real, that like, oh, yeah, the thing behind the screen isn't there. So, it's why the old Star Treks worked better than the new Star Treks. It's the new Star Treks are trying to make them too gritty and more real looking, despite the fact that you can't make anything imaginary real looking in the first place. But the old Star Treks are just people with silly makeup costumes for aliens and wearing bright colored costumes for the main characters, running around in what is quite obviously a set. And you can still buy into the reality of the story that they're trying to portray, because you know that you're watching something fake anyway. And the fact that it's not trying to hide that from you, I think in some ways allows you to better absorb certain elements of the story quality. Whereas with the modern stuff, where everything's trying to be more and more increasingly photorealistic, in a way your brains are kind of being a little overwhelmed with all the setting details, instead of just buying into the basic thrust of what the story and the moral of the story is supposed to be. So I don't know. Anyway, tell me comments below about how I'm either, like a racial Marxist who's out to destroy white people, or tell me that I'm anti-black for some reason. Call me a transphobe. There's tons of things that you can call me in the comment section below that I'm probably not even going to read anyway. So have at it. Hit buttons. Do the popular thing and hit subscribe. Everyone is subscribing. Kids love subscribing to Total Party Skills, and you don't want to be left out of popular thing, do you? So get down there and hit those buttons now, and stay waspinated.